After spending 16 years in this house that my late husband and I built with our retirement savings, I found myself sitting alone at a small folding table in the laundry room, while my son Thomas and his wife Vanessa hosted a dinner party in my dining room. Once Margaret's out of the picture, we can finally renovate this outdated place and sell it for double what it's worth, I overheard Vanessa whisper to Thomas. He replied, "Just wait until after her birthday celebration next month. People would talk if we moved her to Sunny Pines retirement home right after a family party." I quietly finished my microwave dinner, washed my single plate in the utility sink, and went upstairs unnoticed. By morning, I was sitting in Attorney Eleanor Blackwood's office, the deed transfer papers, signed 3 months earlier, spread out before us. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The hostility had been building gradually over the 2 years since Thomas and Vanessa moved in with me. At first, they claimed it was to take care of me after my fall last winter, a minor slip that resulted in nothing more than a bruised hip and wounded pride. But their true intentions became clearer with each passing month. It started small, comments about my china being outdated, suggestions that my furniture was taking up too much space, sighs when my friends would visit for our weekly card games. Then came the renovations to modernize the house, each one erasing more of the home Herbert and I had lovingly created over our 43 years of marriage. My bedroom was relocated to the smallest room upstairs, overlooking the neighbors' brick wall rather than the garden I had tended for decades. My belongings were gradually moved to storage or donated without my permission. Decluttering, Vanessa called it. My opinion was rarely sought and never heeded. Before we continue with this story, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below. And if you're finding this story touching a nerve, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something really special just for you. The dinner party last Saturday marked a turning point. It was for Thomas's colleagues at the investment firm, people who had never met me despite my son working there for 15 years. I spent the afternoon helping prepare, slicing vegetables and polishing the silver that had been my grandmother's wedding gift. I assumed I would be joining them, perhaps sharing stories about Thomas's childhood or simply enjoying the company of new faces after months of increasing isolation. Instead, as guests began to arrive, Vanessa pulled me aside. "Margaret, we've set up a nice little spot for you in the laundry room. There's just not enough space at the dining table for everyone." I glanced into the dining room, my dining room, and counted 2 empty chairs at the table that could seat 12. When I pointed this out, Thomas appeared at Vanessa's side. "Mom, some of the partners are bringing their spouses last minute. We need those seats. Besides, you know how you get confused in large groups these days. This will be more comfortable for everyone." Confused? I was balancing the books for your father's construction company while raising 3 children and serving on the library board. "I think I can handle dinner conversation," I replied. Thomas's expression hardened in a way that reminded me painfully of his father when Herbert was hiding something. "This isn't a debate, Mom. Vanessa has already prepared your plate." The plate was a TV dinner tray, still in its plastic packaging, sitting on a folding table wedged between the washing machine and a basket of dirty clothes. A paper napkin and plastic fork completed the setting. As I sat alone in that laundry room, I could hear the laughter, the clinking of my crystal glasses, the scraping of silverware against my china plates. I heard Vanessa giving tours of their home and discussing renovation plans for when we have the place to ourselves. But what Thomas and Vanessa didn't know, what they had been too busy planning my removal to notice, was that I had already taken steps to protect myself. 3 months earlier, after finding brochures for Sunny Pines retirement home with my name written on them, I had visited my old friend Eleanor Blackwood, who had transitioned from corporate law to elder advocacy after her own mother was taken advantage of by caregivers. "They're pushing me out of my own home, Eleanor," I had confessed, embarrassed by the tears that slipped down my cheeks. "The home Herbert built for us, where we raised our children, where I thought I would live out my days." Eleanor had listened carefully, taking notes and occasionally stopping me to clarify details. When I finished, she asked me a simple question. "Who actually owns the house, Margaret?" "I do. Herbert left everything to me. The house is fully paid off." A slow smile had spread across Eleanor's face. "Then we have options." Those options now lay before us in her office the morning after the dinner party humiliation. A deed transfer to my daughter Charlotte, who lived in Arizona. A life estate provision ensuring I could live in the house until my death. And most importantly, an eviction notice for Thomas and Vanessa, giving them 30 days to find new accommodations. "Are you absolutely certain you want to do this, Margaret?" Eleanor asked, her pen poised above the final document requiring my signature. "Family estrangement is difficult to repair." I thought about the folding table in the laundry room, about the whispered plans to ship me off to Sunny Pines, about the gradual erasure of my existence from my own home. "The estrangement began long before these papers, Eleanor," I said, taking the pen. "I'm just finally acknowledging it." As I signed my name, I felt a strange mixture of sadness and liberation. The home I had shared with Herbert would remain mine for as long as I needed it, and Thomas and Vanessa would soon discover that their plans had been built on a foundation as flimsy as their concern for my well-being. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. My journey to that laundry room table began long before Thomas and Vanessa moved in. To understand how I found myself treated like an unwelcome guest in my own home, you need to know who I was, who I still am, despite their attempts to diminish me. Herbert and I purchased the Victorian house on Maple Avenue in 1975, when Thomas was just 3 years old and Charlotte was a newborn. It was far more than we could afford at the time, a dilapidated 3-story with peeling wallpaper, outdated plumbing, and a garden so overgrown you could barely see the stone pathways. But Herbert, with his contractor's eye, saw the potential beneath the decay. "This place has good bones, Maggie," he'd said, squeezing my hand as we stood in what would eventually become our sunlit kitchen. "With some love and a lot of elbow grease, we can make this a real home." For 20 years, we renovated that house room by room, weekend by weekend. Herbert would come home from his construction sites, tired from a full day's work, and still find energy to sand floors or patch plaster. I learned to strip wallpaper, refinish cabinets, and mix paint colors with scientific precision. Every doorknob, every light fixture, every floorboard held our shared history. The neighbors on Maple Avenue called us the industrious Caldwells. We weren't wealthy by any measure. Herbert's small construction company provided a decent living. But there were lean years when we ate casseroles for weeks straight to afford materials for necessary repairs. I supplemented our income by keeping the books for Herbert's business and working part-time at the public library once both children were in school. Our home became the gathering place for the neighborhood. Summer barbecues in our gradually restored garden. Christmas parties where Herbert would dress as Santa for all the local children. The annual 4th of July potluck where everyone brought chairs and blankets to watch fireworks from our wide front porch. The house was always full of laughter, always open to friends and strangers alike. "A home is meant to be lived in," Herbert would say when I fretted about footprints on freshly waxed floors or potential stains on our carefully upholstered furniture. "What good are perfect rooms if they're empty of people?" I took those words to heart. When Thomas struggled with algebra, his study group spread their textbooks across our dining room table every Wednesday afternoon, fueled by my homemade cookies and lemonade. When Charlotte joined the school theater program, our living room became the rehearsal space for the spring musical, furniture pushed aside to accommodate teenage choreography. The children's friends knew our refrigerator was always stocked, and our door was always open. Mrs. Caldwell's house was a safe haven in the neighborhood, the place you could go if you missed your bus, needed advice about college applications, or just wanted a quiet place to read when your own home was too chaotic. My own childhood had been starkly different. My father was a military man who ran our household with rigid discipline. Rooms were for specific purposes only. Children were to be seen, not heard. Meals were served at exact times, and heaven help you if you were late to the table. My mother, cowed by years of his strict regime, enforced his rules even in his frequent absences. I had promised myself my home would be different, warm, flexible, filled with the messy evidence of lives being fully lived. And for decades, it was exactly that. Herbert's sudden heart attack 12 years ago changed everything. He collapsed in the garden while planting the rose bushes I'd wanted for our anniversary. One moment he was teasing me about my expensive taste in flowers. The next he was gone. 62, years old, and still with so many plans for our future. The first year of widowhood, I simply existed. Thomas, already established in his career at Meridian Investments, flew in for the funeral and returned twice more that year, each visit shorter than the last. Charlotte, who had settled in Arizona with her wife Elena, stayed for 3 weeks after the funeral, helping me navigate the practical aspects of sudden loss. The will, the insurance, the countless administrative tasks that somehow seemed designed to compound grief. But eventually, I began to rediscover myself. I joined a widow's support group at the community center, where I met Judith, Diane, and Frances, 3 women who would become my closest friends. I volunteered additional hours at the library, eventually taking charge of the children's reading program. I planted Herbert's roses and learned through much trial and error how to keep them thriving. The house felt too empty at first, but gradually I reclaimed the spaces we had shared. Herbert's study became my reading room, walls lined with books. I'd always meant to explore. The basement workshop transformed into a small ceramics studio after I took a pottery class at the senior center. I converted the 3rd bedroom into a guest room specifically designed for when my granddaughters Lily and Amelia would visit from Arizona. Financial security was never a concern. Herbert had been meticulous about our future, taking out a substantial life insurance policy that paid off the remaining mortgage and left enough for me to live comfortably. His company, which he'd sold to his deputy 5 years before his death, had provided a generous pension. And I had always been careful with money, a trait Herbert had alternately teased and admired throughout our marriage. "My Maggie," he'd say, reviewing the household accounts I kept with painstaking precision, "you could run the Federal Reserve better than those suits in Washington." By the time Thomas called 3 years ago to announce he'd been promoted to senior investment advisor at Meridian, I had created a life that, while different from what Herbert and I had planned, was fulfilling and purposeful. My calendar was filled with book club meetings, volunteer shifts, pottery classes, and card games with friends. The neighborhood children still knew they could stop by for cookies after school, though now they called me Grandma Margaret, regardless of actual relation. When Thomas mentioned that the promotion would require relocating back to our city, I was delighted. We had maintained a cordial, if somewhat distant relationship over the years, limited mostly to holiday phone calls and occasional weekend visits. The possibility of having him nearby, of perhaps rebuilding the closer connection we'd had during his childhood, seemed like an unexpected gift. "That's wonderful news," I told him. "Have you started looking at houses yet?" His hesitation should have been my first warning. "Actually, Mom, the housing market is crazy right now. Vanessa and I were thinking, well, your place has always been too big for just one person. What if we moved in with you temporarily, just until we find the right property to invest in?" I had reservations. My hard-won independence, my routines, my quiet mornings with coffee, and crosswords. But I also remembered Herbert's words about a home being meant for people. And wasn't this what we had always intended? The family home passing to the next generation? Of course, I said. This house was always meant for family. If only I had recognized the difference between sharing my home with family and surrendering it to strangers who happened to share my blood. If only I had seen that Thomas's eyes, when they surveyed the rooms during their first visit, weren't seeing cherished memories, but untapped real estate potential. But that recognition would come later, after thousands of small humiliations culminated. In a folding table in the laundry room, eating microwaved food while strangers enjoyed my china, my crystal, my dining room. The very heart of the home Herbert and I had built with love, sacrifice, and the belief that its walls would always shelter those who respected its history. Margaret, you need to establish boundaries before there are no boundaries left to establish. Judith's voice carried the particular blend of concern and frustration that had become familiar during our Tuesday coffee meetings. We sat in her sunroom, surrounded by thriving houseplants and the watercolors she'd begun painting after her husband Richard's passing 5 years ago. It had been 6 months since Thomas and Vanessa moved into my home. What had started as just until we find the right property was stretching into an indefinite arrangement with no house hunting in sight. Instead, there were constant improvements to my home. Improvements I neither requested nor desired. It's not as simple as saying no, I explained, though even to my own ears the excuse sounded feeble. Thomas is my son. This is his childhood home, too. A childhood home he visited exactly 3 times in the decade after Herbert died, Diane pointed out, setting down her teacup with enough force to make the saucer rattle. At 74, Diane was the eldest of our group and the least inclined toward diplomatic phrasing. And from what you've told us, Vanessa has been making it quite clear whose home she thinks it is now. She wasn't wrong. The previous week, Vanessa had replaced the vintage botanical prints that had hung in the hallway for 30 years with abstract canvases in aggressive shades of orange and teal. When I mentioned that I missed the botanical prints, she'd patted my hand like I was a confused child. Those dusty old things were really dating the space, Margaret. These are much more contemporary. Thomas agrees they make the hallway look larger. The prints, original lithographs Herbert had given me for our 15th anniversary, were nowhere to be found when I searched later. I think what Diane means, Frances interjected in her gentle way, is that respecting your son shouldn't require erasing yourself from your own home. Frances, a retired social worker, often served as our group's mediator and voice of psychological insight. There's a difference between accommodation and subjugation. Judith reached across the table and squeezed my hand. We're worried about you, Margaret. Every week, you tell us about another piece of your life that's been packed away or pushed aside. First your things, then your spaces, now your friends. The last referred to Vanessa's increasingly obvious irritation whenever Judith, Diane, or Frances visited. The previous month, she'd scheduled carpet cleaning for the exact time of our usual card game, forcing us to relocate to Diane's apartment. The month before that, she'd made pointed comments about seniors spreading germs during flu season, suggesting we should switch to phone calls instead of in-person gatherings. I'm handling it, I insisted, though in truth, I felt increasingly powerless in my own home. They're under a lot of pressure with Thomas's new position. They just need time to settle in. And how much of yourself will be left by then? Diane asked bluntly. You're disappearing, Margaret. We can all see it, even if you can't. The truth of her words stung. I had given up my reading room so it could become Thomas's home office. My ceramic studio was now storage for Vanessa's extensive seasonal decor collections. Even my bedroom had been rearranged to Vanessa's taste, my quilts and family photos replaced with generic hotel-like bedding and mass-produced artwork. But it was Frances who truly understood the deeper issue. After the others left, she lingered. helping me wash the teacups and arrange them on Judith's delicate china rack. "You know," she said casually, "this reminds me of cases I used to see in my practice. Elder autonomy being gradually undermined, often by well-meaning family members who convince themselves they know best." "Thomas and Vanessa aren't abusing me," I protested. "They're just making changes I wouldn't have chosen." "Abuse comes, in many forms," Frances replied, her voice gentle but firm. "Financial exploitation, emotional manipulation, isolation from support systems. Not all wounds leave visible bruises, Margaret." She dried her hands and reached into her handbag, retrieving a business card. "Eleanor Blackwood. She was my classmate at university before she went into law. She specializes in elder rights now, after her own mother's experience with an unscrupulous caregiver." I stared at the card, unwilling to take it. "I don't need a lawyer, Frances. I need patience." "Then consider this a resource for one of the seniors we counsel at the community center," she said, tucking the card into my sweater pocket. "No harm in having information, right?" The card seemed to burn against my chest on the drive home, a physical reminder of choices I wasn't ready to make, of truths I wasn't prepared to face. When I arrived, the house was mercifully empty, Thomas at work, Vanessa at her Pilates class. I headed straight to the kitchen to prepare dinner, one of the few domains where I still maintained some control. As I chopped vegetables for a stew that had been Herbert's favorite, my thoughts drifted to another conversation, one that had taken place nearly 15 years ago in this very kitchen. "Promise me something, Maggie," Herbert had said, pausing in his task of kneading bread dough. It was a Sunday afternoon ritual for us, me preparing vegetables for the week ahead, him making the sourdough he'd become locally famous for after retirement. "Depends what it is," I'd replied with a smile. "If it involves skydiving or getting another dog after Rusty, I'm making no guarantees." His laugh had been warm, but his eyes remained serious. "Promise me you'll remember this is your home, not just an inheritance waiting to happen." I'd stopped chopping, surprised by his sudden solemnity. "Where is this coming from?" Herbert dusted flour from his hands, his gaze drifting toward the window that overlooked our garden. "I overheard Thomas on the phone last visit. He was talking to someone about property values in this neighborhood, about how houses like ours would be gold mines with the right renovations once they're freed up by aging owners." The memory of my shock then almost perfectly mirrored my current discomfort. He was probably just talking professionally. You know how he gets wrapped up in investment talk. "Maybe," Herbert conceded. "But I've noticed how he looks at this place, Maggie. Not like a home with memories, but like an asset with potential. Charlotte sees the swing set we built and remembers learning to pump her legs to go higher. Thomas sees the yard footage and calculates what it would be worth subdivided." "That's not fair," I'd protested, loyal to our son despite the unease Herbert's words provoked. "He's just more practical, more business-minded." "There's practical, and then there's calculating," Herbert said, returning to his kneading with perhaps more force than necessary. "Just promise me you'll protect yourself if I go first. This house is your sanctuary, not just a piece of real estate." At the time, I'd dismissed his concerns as overprotectiveness, perhaps tinged with disappointment that our son hadn't followed him into the construction business. Now, chopping carrots in a kitchen that increasingly felt foreign with its new, stainless appliances and cold marble countertops, I wondered if Herbert had seen something in Thomas that I'd been blind to. The front door opened, jolting me from my reverie. Vanessa's voice called out, "We're home, and we've brought a surprise." The "we" registered before I could process who besides Vanessa might have entered. She appeared in the kitchen doorway, accompanied by a middle-aged woman with a tablet and measuring tape. "Margaret, this is Serena from Pinnacle Home Redesign. She's going to help us finally bring this kitchen into the 21st century." Vanessa's voice carried the false brightness I'd come to recognize as her public-facing tone. "Isn't that exciting?" I looked around at the kitchen, Herbert's kitchen, My kitchen, with its warm oak cabinets he had crafted by hand, the vintage porcelain sink we'd restored together, the built-in breakfast nook where our children had done homework and colored Easter eggs and learned to fold paper airplanes. Actually, I said, my voice steadier than I expected, I like my kitchen exactly as it is. Vanessa's smile didn't falter, though her eyes hardened slightly. Oh, Margaret, we've discussed this. The cabinets are so dated, and that old sink is practically unsanitary. Thomas and I think— I don't recall any discussion, I interrupted, surprising myself with my firmness. And while you and Thomas may have opinions, this is still my house and my kitchen. The designer glanced between us, professional smile frozen in place, but eyes registering the tension. Perhaps I should come back another time when you've all had a chance to align on the vision. There's no need, Vanessa insisted, shooting me a look that mingled disbelief and irritation. Margaret is just a bit resistant to change. Thomas and I are handling the renovation decisions. Something shifted in me then, a quiet but seismic realignment. I thought of Herbert's warning, of Frances's card still in my pocket, of Diane's blunt assessment that I was disappearing. No, I said simply. You're not. Later that evening, after a tense dinner during which Vanessa pointedly discussed cabinet samples despite the designer's hasty departure, I retreated to my bedroom and finally removed Frances's card from my pocket. Eleanor Blackwood, elder law, specialist. Below her name, a simple tagline: protecting your autonomy, preserving your dignity. I didn't call that night, or the next, but I placed the card in my wallet, nestled behind Herbert's faded photograph. A seed had been planted, one that would lie dormant until that fateful dinner party, when I found myself exiled to the laundry room in my own home. A seed that would eventually grow into the deed transfer papers that would change everything. Thought you. Days following my stand in the kitchen took on a new tension. Thomas and Vanessa maintained an icy politeness, speaking to me only when necessary and always with the strained patience one might use with a difficult child. Their strategy was clear. If direct confrontation wouldn't work, they would simply proceed around me, treating my objections as minor inconveniences rather than legitimate barriers. The kitchen renovation was postponed, not canceled. Serena, the designer, didn't return, but I noticed Vanessa taking measurements and photos when she thought I wasn't looking. Discussions about updates and modernization moved behind closed doors, held in whispered conversations that abruptly ended when I entered a room. I might have continued in this uneasy detente indefinitely, making small stands where possible but largely accommodating their gradual takeover of my home. That is, until the day I discovered the brochures. I hadn't meant to snoop. I'd simply been searching for a book I'd misplaced, one of Herbert's favorites that I often reread when I missed him most, The Old Man and the Sea. Its spine cracked from years of handling, its margins filled with his thoughtful annotations. Thomas had been organizing the bookshelves in the living room, removing what he called clutter, and rearranging what remained by color rather than subject or author. My book had disappeared in the process. While Thomas and Vanessa were at a work function, I searched his home office, my former reading room, thinking he might have relocated Herbert's books there. The drawer of his desk was partially open, and a glossy corner of paper caught my eye. Thinking it might be a book catalog, I pulled it out. Sunny Pines Retirement Community, proclaimed the cover, featuring smiling seniors playing shuffleboard, beneath palm trees. Where your golden years truly shine. My first thought was that perhaps Thomas was researching options for one of his clients. His work involved financial planning, after all. But when I flipped open the brochure, I found my own name written in Thomas's neat handwriting on an attached sticky note. Discuss Margaret's transition timeline after kitchen renovation. My hands began to tremble. I set the brochure down and continued searching, finding an entire folder labeled Mother's Arrangements tucked beneath investment prospectuses and tax documents. Inside were more brochures from various assisted living facilities, a printout of my house's estimated market value from a real estate website, and most disturbingly, a draft power of attorney document, unsigned, that would grant Thomas comprehensive control over my financial and medical decisions. I sat heavily in Thomas's desk chair, the folder open in my lap, as the full picture became devastatingly clear. This wasn't about temporary housing while they found their own place. This wasn't even about modernizing a house they planned to share with me. This was about waiting for the right moment to move me out entirely, to take possession of my home and my autonomy in one calculated sweep. The front door opened downstairs, voices drifting up, Thomas and Vanessa returning earlier than expected. With shaking hands, I replaced everything exactly as I'd found it and slipped out of the office, the book forgotten in the shock of my discovery. That night, I lay awake until the house grew silent, thinking about Herbert's warning, about Francis's concerned looks, about the steadily shrinking space I occupied in my own home. When morning came, I made a decision. I'm going to visit Charlotte for a few days, I announced at breakfast, keeping my voice casual. She's been asking me to come see Lily's new school, and I think some grandmother time is overdue. If Thomas and Vanessa were surprised by my sudden travel plans, they hid it well. In fact, Vanessa seemed almost pleased. "What perfect timing," she said, exchanging a quick glance with Thomas. "We were just saying we should have the upstairs bathroom updated while you're away. Much less disruptive for you." "How thoughtful," I replied, maintaining my calm facade while mentally adding the bathroom, Herbert's meticulous tile work, and the claw foot tub we'd restored together to the list of my home's features slated for erasure. "I'll be leaving tomorrow, if that works with your schedule to drive me to the airport, Thomas." "Actually, I have client meetings all day," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "But I can call you a taxi." "No need. Judith offered to drive me," I lied smoothly. "She's heading that direction anyway." The relief on his face confirmed what I already knew. My presence had become an inconvenience, my needs an imposition on their plans. I was being systematically designed out of my own life. I did call Judith, though not about a ride to the airport. "I need to borrow your car tomorrow," I explained, keeping my voice low though I was alone in my bedroom. "And I need you to cover for me if Thomas or Vanessa call asking about me." "Margaret Caldwell, are you going on the lam?" Judith asked, half joking but with an undercurrent of genuine concern. "What's happening?" "Not the lam," I assured her. "Just a very important appointment I'd rather they didn't know about. I'll explain everything afterward, I promise." Eleanor Blackwood's law office occupied the first floor of a converted Victorian not unlike my own home, though hers had been transformed into a professional space with modern furnishings that somehow complemented rather than erased the building's historic character. The waiting area featured comfortable chairs, good lighting, and not a single patronizing pamphlet about senior moments or simplified legal concepts. Eleanor herself proved to be a woman about my age, with silver haircut, in a precise bob and eyes that missed nothing behind stylish red frames. She listened without interruption as I detailed the past months of gradual displacement, the kitchen confrontation, and finally, my discovery of the retirement home brochures and power of attorney documents. "Unfortunately, your situation is far from unique," she said when I finished. "I see variations of this story several times a month. Adult children who view their parents' homes as inheritance rather than their actual current residence. The good news is that, legally, you're in a very strong position." She pulled a legal pad toward her and began making notes. "The house is fully in your name, correct? No mortgage, no liens, no joint ownership?" "Yes. Herbert left everything to me. The mortgage was paid off 10 years ago. And no existing power of attorney or healthcare directive naming Thomas as your decision maker?" "No," I confirmed. "Herbert and I had those documents drawn up years ago, but they named each other. After he died, I never updated them. A fact that now seemed providential rather than an oversight." "What about your mental and physical health? Any diagnoses that could be used to question your capacity to make decisions? I bristled slightly. I'm 71, not incapacitated. My last physical showed I'm healthier than most people a decade younger. My doctor says my only issue is being stubbornly independent, which I consider a compliment. Eleanor smiled at that, making another note. Trust me, I understand. I'm 68 myself, and the number of times younger colleagues assume I need technological help or offer to carry my briefcase is maddening. I'm establishing baseline facts, not questioning your capabilities. She set down her pen and looked at me directly. Margaret, based on what you've shared, I believe your son and daughter-in-law are positioning themselves to take control of your home and potentially your finances, likely through a guardianship action if they can't persuade you to sign a power of attorney voluntarily. Though I had suspected as much, hearing it stated so plainly sent a chill through me. What can I do? You have several options, Eleanor said, her tone shifting from diagnostic to strategic. We can send a formal letter asserting your rights and demanding they cease their efforts. We can file a protective order if you feel unsafe. Or, she paused, studying me thoughtfully, we can take more proactive measures to secure your long-term autonomy and the legacy of your home. What kind of measures? Eleanor outlined a plan that was both simple and elegant in its design. A deed, transfer, that would protect my right to live in my home for the remainder of my life, while legally placing ownership beyond Thomas and Vanessa's reach. A comprehensive estate plan that would clearly document my wishes and capacity. A financial restructuring that would secure my assets from potential exploitation. The most important question, she said after explaining the technical details, is who you trust to honor your wishes and protect your interests, not just on paper, but in spirit. The answer came immediately. Charlotte, my daughter in Arizona. Tell me about her, Eleanor prompted, and for the next 20 minutes I shared Charlotte's story, her work as an elementary school principal, her commitment to her community, the gentle way she had always honored both her father's and my independence, while remaining emotionally present despite the physical distance. She calls me every Sunday without fail, I explained. Not out of obligation, but because she genuinely wants to know how my week was, what I'm reading, what projects I'm working on. When she visits, she sleeps in her old bedroom without complaint. Even though the twin bed must be uncomfortable for her now, she notices and comments when I've rearranged furniture or planted something new in the garden. Most tellingly, I added, Charlotte had offered multiple times to help me find a nice apartment closer to her in Arizona, but always with the caveat, only if and when you're ready to leave your home, Mom. I know how much it means to you. As I spoke, I realized how differently my two children viewed their childhood home, and by extension, me. To Thomas, both had become assets to be managed, and eventually liquidated for maximum return. To Charlotte, both were to be cherished and respected for as long as they remained. I think we have our answer, Eleanor said when I finished. Let me outline exactly what we'll need to do. 2 hours later, I left Eleanor's office with a plan and a profound sense of having reclaimed some control over my future. The deed transfer would take several weeks to prepare and process, but immediate steps were already in motion. Documentation of the house's condition and my possessions, secure copies of important papers, discreet financial arrangements that would ensure my independence regardless of my living situation. As I drove back in Judith's borrowed car, I felt a strange mixture of sorrow and determination. I had not wanted this conflict with my son. I had hoped for a relationship based on mutual respect and shared memories in the home where he grew up. But Thomas had made his intentions clear, even if he hadn't stated them directly. Now I would make mine equally clear, not through confrontation, but through careful legal preparation. For the moment, however, I would return to the uneasy peace of our shared household. I would pretend to visit Charlotte while actually putting my affairs in order. I would smile at their renovation plans while securing my legal position. I would eat at their table, or in the laundry room if necessary, while knowing that soon, very soon, the true ownership of that table and every other part of my home would be revealed. The deed transfer papers were my unexpected advantage, my hidden resource in a situation where I had felt increasingly powerless, and when the moment came to reveal them, I would be ready. I spent the next 3 weeks engaged in a careful performance, one that required more acting ability than I'd displayed. Since my role as Aunt Eller in the community theater production of Oklahoma, 15 years earlier. On the surface, I was simply Margaret, a bit more accommodating than usual, perhaps, but otherwise unchanged. Beneath that placid exterior, I was methodically executing Eleanor's strategic plan. The visit to Charlotte provided perfect cover for the initial legal work. I did fly to Arizona, spending 5 precious days with my daughter, her wife Elena, and my granddaughters. What Thomas didn't know was that Charlotte flew back with me, staying at Judith's house while we met with Eleanor to sign the deed transfer and other documents. Charlotte's signature, witnessed and notarized in Eleanor's office, officially transferred ownership of my house to her, with an irrevocable life estate provision that guaranteed my right to live there until my death. "Are you absolutely certain about this, Mom?" Charlotte had asked, pen hovering above the document. "Once it's done, the house will legally be mine, not yours." "That's precisely the point," I replied, thinking of the Mother's Arrangements folder hidden in Thomas's desk. "I trust you to honor my wishes about my home. Thomas and Vanessa have made it clear they have other plans." When I returned home, I found those plans had accelerated in my absence. The upstairs bathroom had indeed been updated, Herbert's handcrafted tiles jackhammered out and replaced with generic gray squares. The clawfoot tub removed entirely in favor of a glass-enclosed shower. The medicine cabinet where I'd kept my few toiletries was gone, replaced by a floating vanity with no storage space for my belongings. "We thought you'd like having a more accessible shower," Vanessa explained with that particular blend of condescension and false concern I'd come to recognize. "No dangerous tub edges to navigate. Very senior-friendly." I simply nodded, swallowing the grief I felt for another piece of Herbert's craftsmanship destroyed. "The bathroom was just a room," I reminded myself. The legal documents now safely filed were what mattered. The following weeks required constant vigilance and careful timing. I needed to secure copies of important papers without alerting Thomas or Vanessa to my activities. I needed to document the condition and contents of my home without appearing to catalog it. I needed to maintain the impression that I was gradually accepting their vision for the future while actively working to ensure that vision would never materialize. I became strategic about my movements and activities. When Thomas and Vanessa were home, I played the role of the increasingly compliant mother-in-law, offering minimal resistance to their improvements and decisions. When they were away, I photographed rooms and possessions, copied documents, and communicated with Eleanor through a prepaid cell phone Francis had purchased for me, a phone Thomas and Vanessa knew nothing about. "You're like a secret agent," Judith remarked during one of our Tuesday gatherings, which had relocated permanently to her home after Vanessa had rescheduled carpet cleaning for the 3rd consecutive month to coincide with our planned card game. "More like a prisoner documenting the conditions of her confinement," Diane countered with her typical bluntness. "Though I must say, Margaret, you've shown remarkable restraint. If someone had ripped out my bathroom fixtures, I'd have been tempted toward violence involving heavy kitchen implements." "It's not the fixtures that matter," I explained, arranging my cards. "It's what they represent, the systematic erasure of Herbert's craftsmanship and our shared history. But the deed transfer protects what's truly important, my right to remain in my home and Charlotte's authority to enforce that right." Frances, ever the insightful one, studied me over her reading glasses. "And yet you haven't told Thomas what you've done? Why continue the charade if your position is legally secure?" It was a fair question, one I'd asked myself repeatedly over the past weeks. The deed transfer had been completed and recorded with the county. the legal documents establishing my ongoing rights were firmly in place, I could have confronted Thomas and Vanessa immediately, ended their renovation plans, and presumably their residence in my home with a single conversation. Instead, I had continued to play along, watching more of Herbert's handiwork disappear beneath. Contractors' hammers, more of my possessions relocated to storage, which I strongly suspected meant the donation center. More of my autonomy eroded through 1,000 small decisions made without my meaningful input. Timing, I answered finally. Eleanor advised waiting until they make their endgame clear. Right now, they still believe they're moving slowly enough that I don't see the full picture. They're still positioning, still laying groundwork. If I reveal my hand too soon, they might try to challenge the deed transfer or claim I was manipulated by Charlotte. What I didn't say, what felt too painful to articulate even among these trusted friends, was that some small part of me still hoped for reconciliation. Some maternal instinct still whispered that Thomas was my son, that surely there had been a misunderstanding, that perhaps his intentions weren't as calculating as they appeared. That hope, however irrational, kept me silent through another bathroom renovation, through the replacement of my garden's heirloom roses with low-maintenance landscaping, through the gradual disappearance of family photographs from the walls. It kept me nodding and smiling as more of Herbert's presence, and increasingly my own, was systematically removed from the home we had built together. Until the dinner party. The invitation came by phone from Thomas himself. Unusual, as he typically communicated through texts or brief conversations between his comings and goings. "We're hosting an important client dinner next Saturday," he explained. "The Hendersons are considering a significant investment portfolio with Meridian, and Vanessa thought entertaining at home would be more personal than a restaurant." "Of course," I replied, mentally reviewing my calendar. "I can make my lasagna. It was always your father's favorite for special occasions." The silence that followed lasted just a beat too long. "Actually, Mom, Vanessa's arranged catering. Very upscale. Specific wine pairings, that sort of thing. Professional service staff. And everything?" "Oh." I tried to keep the disappointment from my voice. "Well, I'd be happy to help with setup or—" "That's all arranged," he interrupted. "Actually, Vanessa and I thought, given the business nature of the evening, it might be better if you weren't part of the main dinner." I gripped the phone tighter. "I see. It's just that these conversations get very technical," Thomas continued, his voice taking on the slightly patronizing tone I'd come to recognize. "Investment strategies, tax implications, estate planning options. You'd be bored." Honestly, what he meant, of course, was that my presence would complicate the narrative they were constructing. The sophisticated financial advisor and his stylish wife in their tastefully renovated historic home. A 71-year-old woman who might reference the house's history or mention Thomas's childhood would disrupt that carefully curated image. "Of course," I said, my voice steady despite the hurt blooming in my chest. "I understand." I expected him to suggest I make other plans for the evening, dinner with friends perhaps, or a movie. Instead, he cleared his throat awkwardly. "We've set up a nice space for you in the laundry room for dinner. Vanessa thought it would be more comfortable for you than trying to find somewhere to go. The caterers will prepare a plate for you, and we've put in a small TV so you can watch your shows." The laundry room, the smallest, most utilitarian space in the entire house. A room without windows, without comfortable seating, without any connection to the home Herbert and I had lovingly created. I was being literally relegated to the margins of my own house, tucked away like an embarrassing family secret, while strangers dined on catered meals in my dining room. "Thomas?" I began, then stopped, unsure how to even respond to such a breathtaking display of disrespect. "It's just for one evening, Mom," he said quickly. "The Hendersons are really important clients. This could be a huge step forward for my career." In that moment, I saw with perfect clarity what I had been avoiding acknowledging. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't Thomas being thoughtless or Vanessa being controlling. This was a deliberate, calculated dismantling of my place in my own home, the final step before suggesting I might be more comfortable in one of those assisted living facilities whose brochures lurked in his desk drawer. "I understand," I said again, but this time, the words carried a different weight. I did understand everything at last. "Great," Thomas replied, relief evident in his voice. "Saturday at 7, then. The caterers will bring something to the laundry room for you." After we hung up, I sat motionless for several minutes, phone still in hand. Then I called Eleanor Blackwood. "It's time," I told her. "They've made their endgame clear." Eleanor's voice was calm but determined. "Then we'll make ours equally clear. I'll have the final documentation ready by Friday. Will that work with your timeline?" I thought about the dinner party, about the folding table I'd glimpsed being stored in the laundry room, about the careful performance I'd maintained these past weeks. "Perfect timing," I replied, a phrase Thomas and Vanessa had used so often while dismantling my home and my dignity. Absolutely perfect timing. Creating and narrating this story took a lot of time and effort. If you're enjoying it so far, please hit that subscribe button. It really means a lot to me. Now, let's get back to what happened next. The Saturday of the dinner party arrived with picture-perfect weather. Gentle sunshine filtering through the maple trees Herbert had planted along our driveway, a light breeze carrying the scent of the neighbors' lilacs through open windows. If I believed in omens, I might have taken it as a sign that the day would unfold in my favor. The house had been in a state of carefully orchestrated chaos since morning. Vanessa directed a team of cleaners with military precision, pointing out invisible smudges on windows and minute imperfections in the arrangement of the decorative items that had replaced my family photographs and keepsakes. The dining room table, my table, where decades of family meals and holiday gatherings had taken place, was being set with china I'd never seen before. Sleek white plates with platinum rims that made my grandmother's floral pattern look hopelessly outdated by comparison. I spent most of the day in my bedroom, the last relatively unchanged space in the house. Though even there, Vanessa's influence had crept in through new bedding and curtains that coordinated with her whole house color story. I had contacted each of my friends the day before, letting them know what would unfold and asking them to be available by phone afterward. Judith had offered her guest room for as long as you need it, while Diane had more colorfully suggested she could bring her late husband's golf clubs in case things get ugly. "I'm hoping it won't come to that," I'd told them, though in truth, I had no idea how Thomas and Vanessa would react when their plans collapsed around them. At precisely 5:30 p.m., Vanessa knocked on my bedroom door, entering without waiting for a response, another small erosion of my privacy that had become routine. "The guest will be arriving in 90 minutes, she announced, appraising me with a critical eye. "That laundry room setup is all ready for you. We put in the folding table and one of the kitchen chairs, and there's even a little TV tray for your dinner." She said this as if describing accommodations at a luxury hotel, rather than a makeshift dining space wedged between the washing machine and a basket of dirty clothes. "How thoughtful," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. Vanessa seemed slightly thrown by my lack of resistance. She'd clearly come prepared for objections, perhaps even a confrontation she could later describe to Thomas as another example of my difficult behavior. "The caterers are preparing a special plate for you," she continued, watching me carefully. "Nothing too complicated or spicy. Simple food, easy to digest, appropriate for your age." I'd been eating spicy Thai food with Judith and planning a cooking class on Moroccan cuisine at the community center, but correcting Vanessa's assumptions about my culinary preferences seemed pointless now. "I'm sure it will be fine," I said, turning back to the book I'd been pretending to read. Vanessa lingered, perhaps waiting for the argument that didn't come. Finally, she said, We'd appreciate if you could stay in the laundry room until all the guests have left. The Hendersons are very important clients for Thomas, and it would be distracting if you wandered through during business discussions. Of course, I agreed mildly. I wouldn't want to distract from Thomas's important business. She left, clearly unsettled by my easy compliance but unwilling to question it. As soon as the door closed behind her, I reached for the leather portfolio tucked beneath my pillow. The documents Eleanor had prepared, including copies of the deed transfer, my life estate agreement, and a formal notice requesting Thomas and Vanessa vacate the property within 30 days. At 6:45 p.m., I changed into my best outfit, a deep blue dress I'd purchased for Charlotte's wedding 15 years earlier, updated with a silk scarf Diane had brought me from her Mediterranean cruise. I applied makeup with care, styled my silver hair, and added the pearl earrings Herbert had given me on our 40th anniversary. Not the appearance of someone resigned to eating alone in a laundry room. Downstairs, I could hear the caterers moving efficiently through the kitchen, the soft murmur of their professional conversations a counterpoint to Vanessa's increasingly tense directions. Thomas's voice occasionally cut through, its forced joviality suggesting pre-dinner nerves. At precisely 7 p.m., the doorbell rang, announcing the first guests. I remained in my room, listening to the sounds of arrivals, introductions, the clink of glassware as champagne was served in the living room. Through my partially open door, I could hear Vanessa's carefully practiced laugh, Thomas's deeper tones as he discussed market trends and investment strategies. At 7:30 p.m., I heard Vanessa's footsteps approaching my door again. She entered after a perfunctory knock, surprise flashing across her face at my dressed-up appearance. "The Hendersons and the Blakeleys have arrived," she informed me, eyeing my outfit with obvious concern. "Dinner will be served in 15 minutes. I've asked the caterers to bring your plate to the laundry room now so you can eat while it's hot." "That won't be necessary," I said, rising and gathering my portfolio. "I won't be eating in the laundry room." Vanessa's smile tightened. "We discussed this, Margaret. The dining room is set for 8 people, Thomas and me, the Hendersons, the Blakeleys, and the Meridian portfolio manager and his wife. There isn't space for additional seating." "I'm not asking to join your dinner party," I clarified, moving toward the door. "I simply won't be eating in the laundry room of my own home." She stepped partially in front of me, voice dropping to an urgent whisper. "Please don't make a scene, Margaret. This dinner is incredibly important for Thomas's career. We can discuss changing the arrangements next time, but tonight, I need you to cooperate." I met her gaze steadily. "I have cooperated, Vanessa. For months, I've cooperated as you and Thomas have systematically removed me from my own home. Physically, emotionally, and apparently now literally. That cooperation ends tonight." Before she could respond, I stepped around her and walked calmly down the hallway toward the stairs. Behind me, I heard her hurried footsteps as she attempted to catch up without appearing to run, maintaining the appearance of control even as it slipped away. The voices from the living room grew louder as I descended the stairs, Vanessa a few steps behind me. I could hear Thomas describing the historic character of the house, carefully edited to suggest he and Vanessa had personally overseen its restoration, rather than moving into a home already lovingly maintained for decades. Original woodwork throughout, though we've updated all the bathrooms and the kitchen to modern standards while preserving the architectural integrity. He stopped mid-sentence as I appeared in the living room doorway, Vanessa's tense presence behind me immediately drawing his attention. The room fell silent as 6 well-dressed strangers turned to look at me. 3 couples in expensive business attire, champagne flutes in hand, their expressions curious. "Mom," Thomas said after a moment's hesitation, his voice straining for normalcy. "I thought you were having dinner in your special arrangement." "Change of plans," I replied pleasantly, then turned to address the guests. "Good evening, I'm Margaret Caldwell. This is my home." An older gentleman, presumably Mr. Henderson, stepped forward with a warm smile. "A pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Caldwell. Your son was just telling us about the remarkable history of this house." "Was he?" I returned the smile. "How interesting. I'd be happy to fill in any details he might have missed, having lived here for 46 years. My late husband Herbert and I purchased it in 1975, when it was barely habitable. Every renovation, every restoration you see was done by his hands, or under his direction." Thomas moved quickly to my side, his hand closing around my upper arm in what might have appeared to others as an affectionate gesture, but felt more like restraint. "Mom's being modest," he said with a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "She and my father did the initial work, but Vanessa and I have completely modernized the property since moving in. Speaking of dinner, I believe the caterers are ready to serve. Shall we move to the dining room?" His grip on my arm tightened slightly, a clear message to withdraw. In the past, I might have complied, retreating to my assigned space to avoid conflict. But tonight, I had the weight of Eleanor's documents in my portfolio and the strength of my legal position bolstering my resolve. "Actually," I said, gently but firmly removing his hand from my arm, "before dinner, there's something important I need to discuss with Thomas and Vanessa. It will only take a moment, and then you can enjoy your meal undisturbed." Thomas is professional. Composure visibly cracked. "Mom, this isn't the time." "It's exactly the time," I interrupted, my voice quiet but carrying the authority that had once sent him to his room as a teenager. "And I believe you'll want to have this conversation privately." A flicker of uncertainty crossed his face as he registered my tone. The Hendersons and other guests looked on with polite discomfort, the evening clearly deviating from the sophisticated business dinner they had anticipated. "Perhaps we should give the family a moment," Mrs. Henderson suggested tactfully. "We could admire the garden while the caterers finish preparing?" "An excellent suggestion," I agreed, before Thomas or Vanessa could respond. The back garden is particularly lovely this time of year, even with the recent updates. As the guests filed out toward the back patio, guided by a flustered Vanessa, Thomas remained in the living room, his expression a mixture of anger and confusion. "What are you doing?" he demanded once we were alone. "Do you have any idea how important these clients are? How long I've been cultivating this relationship?" "I have some idea," I replied, opening my portfolio. "Just as I have some idea about your plans for me and for this house." His expression shifted subtly, a tightening around the eyes, a slight straightening of his posture. "What are you talking about?" "I found the brochures for Sunny Pines retirement community," I said, watching his face carefully. "And the draft power of attorney, and the notes about my transition timeline." A moment of genuine shock crossed his features before he composed himself. "Those were just contingency planning, Mom. For someday, when you might need more care than we can provide at home. Every responsible family considers these options eventually. And the kitchen renovation, the bathroom updates, the systematic removal of every trace of your father's craftsmanship and my personal history from this house? Were those also contingency planning?" Thomas sighed, adopting the patient tone I'd grown to detest. "We've been improving the property, Mom, modernizing, increasing its value, for your benefit as much as ours." "For my benefit," I repeated. "Is that why I'm expected to eat in the laundry room tonight while strangers dine at my table? For my benefit?" "That's not fair," he protested, though I noted he didn't deny or explain the laundry room arrangement. "Tonight is a special circumstance, a business necessity, and relegating me to the smallest, least comfortable room in my own home, that's a business necessity too?" Before he could fabricate another justification, I removed the deed transfer documents from my portfolio and placed them on the coffee table between us. "What's this?" he asked, not reaching for them. "The deed to this house," I replied. "Transferring ownership to Charlotte, with a life estate provision guaranteeing my right to live here until my death. The color drained from his face as the implications registered. You can't do that. I already have, I said simply. The transfer was completed and recorded with the county 3 weeks ago. This house legally belongs to Charlotte now, not to me, and certainly not to you or Vanessa. Thomas stared at the documents as if they might transform before his eyes, the carefully constructed future he had planned dissolving with each second of silence. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost its patronizing patience, replaced by something harder and colder. This can't be legal, he insisted, still not touching the papers. You can't just give away the house without my knowledge. I've been investing in this property, managing your affairs, planning for your care. Planning. For my removal, I corrected. And yes, it's entirely legal. I am of sound mind, and the house was solely in my name. Herbert left it to me, not to you, with the understanding that I would decide its ultimate disposition. His face flushed. Dad would have expected you to be fair about the inheritance, to divide things equally between your children. Your father expected me to protect myself, I said, thinking of Herbert's warning in our kitchen years ago. And that's exactly what I've done. Thomas's expression shifted then, calculation replacing shock as he searched for a new angle of attack. What about all the money we've invested in renovations? The bathroom, the kitchen plans, the landscaping? Vanessa and I have put thousands into improving this property. Improvements I never requested, I reminded him. Changes that systematically erased your father's work and my preferences. But if you'd like to itemize those expenses, I'm sure Eleanor can factor them into the formal agreement. Eleanor? The unfamiliar name further unsettled him. Who's Eleanor? My attorney, Eleanor Blackwood. She specializes in elder law and protection of autonomy. The mention of an attorney seemed to finally penetrate Thomas's assumption that he could control the situation. He sank onto the sofa, running a hand through his carefully styled hair. You've been planning this, he said. Not a question, but an accusation. All these weeks, while we've been taking care of you, improving your home, you've been conspiring, behind our backs. The irony of his statement might have been amusing under different circumstances, his indignation at my supposed deception, while he had literally hidden away brochures for my institutionalization. As it was, I felt only a deep sadness for what our relationship had become. Yes, I acknowledged. I've been planning, just as you and Vanessa have been planning. The difference is that my plans involve maintaining my dignity and autonomy in my own home, while yours involved moving me to Sunny Pines so you could sell this house out from under me. That's not, he began, then stopped, perhaps realizing denials were pointless now. We were trying to do what's best for everyone. You can't manage this big house alone indefinitely. Eventually, you'll need care, assisted living communities. Provide that, plus activities, socialization. If and when I need additional support, I interrupted, those decisions will be made by me, in consultation with Charlotte, who is now both the legal owner of this property and my designated healthcare proxy. Which brings me to the second document. I placed another paper on the table, the formal notice to vacate. What's this? Thomas asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. Notice that you and Vanessa have 30 days to find alternative housing. Charlotte has decided she doesn't wish to have tenants in her property, particularly ones who have demonstrated such disregard for its primary resident. He picked up the notice, skimming it with growing disbelief. This is ridiculous. You can't evict us from our home. It's not your home, I corrected gently. It never was. You were welcome to share my home, but you chose instead to try to take it over. There's a significant difference. We'll fight this, he warned, dropping the notice back on the table. There are laws about family properties, about caregiver rights. You can't just throw us out after we've been taking care of you. Taking care of me, I repeated slowly. Is that what you call relegating me to the laundry room while you entertain clients? Removing my belongings without permission? Planning my transition to a retirement facility without my knowledge or consent? The sound of the patio door opening interrupted our conversation. Vanessa entered, her carefully maintained hostess smile faltering as she registered the tension in the room and the documents on the coffee table. "The caterers say dinner is ready to serve," she announced, her eyes darting between Thomas's ashen face and my calm demeanor. "Is everything all right in here?" "Margaret has transferred ownership of the house to Charlotte," Thomas informed. "Her," his voice tight. "And she's giving us 30 days to move out." Vanessa's composure cracked entirely, her expression cycling rapidly through disbelief, anger, and calculation. "That's impossible. She can't do that." "I assure you, I can. And have," I replied. "The legal documents are quite clear. The house now belongs to Charlotte, with provisions ensuring I can live here for the remainder of my life." "This is how you repay us?" Vanessa demanded, abandoning any pretense of respect. "After everything we've done for you, the upgrades too, this outdated house, the care we've provided, the folding table in the laundry room," I interjected, "the retirement home brochures, the draft power of attorney that would have stripped me of all decision-making authority?" Vanessa's gaze shot to Thomas. "You said those were in your desk drawer." "They were," he confirmed. "She must have been snooping." "In my own home," I reminded them both. "Looking for a book of my husband's that disappeared during your decluttering." The doorway to the living room darkened as one of the catering staff appeared, looking uncomfortable at interrupting what was clearly a tense family moment. "Excuse me," she said hesitantly. "The first course is ready to serve, but your guests are still outside. Should we delay, or—" Vanessa's social mask snapped back into place with impressive speed. "No need to delay. We'll bring them in right away. Just a small family discussion that's now concluded." She turned to me, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Margaret, your plate is ready in the kitchen, if you'd prefer that to your original arrangement." The calculated insult, implying I should still eat separately despite the revealed documents, might have hurt me weeks ago. Now, I simply smiled in return. "Actually, I won't be needing dinner here tonight. I'm joining Judith and the others at Marcello's. I just came down to deliver these documents and clarify the new ownership arrangements before I left." I gathered, my portfolio and purse, watching as Thomas and Vanessa exchanged glances, clearly trying to assess how to salvage their business dinner given this dramatic shift in circumstances. "You're leaving?" Thomas asked. "Now? In the middle of our client dinner?" "Yes," I confirmed. "Though technically, I was never part of your dinner, was I? Just a complication to be hidden away between the washing machine and laundry basket." I turned to the waiting catering staff member. "The dining room table can seat 8 comfortably. There should be plenty of room for everyone now." As I moved toward the front door, Vanessa hissed to Thomas, "Do something. We can't just let her leave after dropping this bomb. What will we tell the Hendersons?" "What would you suggest?" Thomas replied, his voice equally low but audible in the tense silence. "Physically restraining her? That would certainly impress your clients." I paused at the door, turning back to face them one last time. "I'll return tomorrow afternoon. We can discuss the transition plan then, calmly and with appropriate legal representation if you wish. In the meantime, I suggest you focus on entertaining your guests. After all, as you've both reminded me repeatedly, first impressions are so important in business dealings." With that parting comment, not vindictive, but pointed enough to acknowledge the situation's irony, I stepped outside into the early evening air. Judith's car was already waiting at the curb, exactly as we had arranged. As I settled into the passenger seat, she raised her eyebrows questioningly. "Well?" she asked. "How did the great reckoning go?" "About as expected," I replied, unexpected emotion tightening my throat as the magnitude of what had just transpired began to sink in. Shock, denial, anger, attempts to regain control. They'll probably spend the night consulting lawyers, searching for loopholes. Will they find any? Judith looked concerned as she pulled away from the curb. Eleanor says no. The deed transfer is ironclad, especially with Charlotte's full participation and the life estate provision clearly documented. They might try to claim I was coerced or confused, but my medical records and independent legal consultation undermine that angle completely. We drove in silence for a few blocks, the familiarity of the neighborhood, where I had walked, gardened, and lived for nearly 5 decades, providing a poignant backdrop to the evening's confrontation. "Are you all right?" Judith asked finally, glancing over at me. That couldn't have been easy, no matter how justified. The question penetrated the calm determination that had carried me through the confrontation. Was I all right? My son and his wife had systematically attempted to erase me from my own home, had planned my removal to a facility I had never agreed to, had tonight intended to make me eat alone in a laundry room while entertaining business associates at my table, and I had been forced to take legal action to protect myself from their machinations. No, I admitted quietly. I'm not all right, but I will be. At Marcello's, Diane and Francis were already waiting in a corner booth, a bottle of champagne chilling, in an ice bucket between them. Their expressions as I approached were a mixture of anticipation and concern. Judging by the fact that you're here and not eating from a TV tray between detergent bottles, I'm guessing Operation Deed Transfer has been revealed, Diane said as I slid into the booth. Successfully delivered, I confirmed, though successfully feels like the wrong word for having to legally outmaneuver my own son. Francis reached across the table and squeezed my hand. You did what was necessary to protect yourself, Margaret. There's no shame in self-preservation. She's right, Judith added, signaling the waiter to pour champagne for all of us. Thomas and Vanessa left you no choice. They were the ones who turned your home into a battleground. As the bubbling liquid filled our glasses, I felt the strange duality of emotions that had characterized this entire experience. Grief for what had been lost, determination to protect what remained. The champagne caught the light, golden and effervescent, like the moment itself. A celebration tinged with sorrow, a victory that came with significant personal cost. To Margaret, Diane proposed, raising her glass, who reminds us all that being 71 doesn't mean surrendering your backbone along with your retirement papers. To friends, I countered, including all 3 women in my toast, who see clearly when we're blinded by hope or habit. I wouldn't have recognized what was happening, let alone had the courage to confront it, without your perspectives. As we clinked glasses, I realized that while the house on Maple Avenue contained decades of memories and Herbert's loving craftsmanship, home was ultimately about respect, dignity, and the freedom to exist fully in one's own space. By that definition, I felt more at home in this restaurant booth, surrounded by friends who valued me exactly as I was, than I had in my own house for months. Tomorrow would bring difficult conversations, possibly legal consultations, certainly emotional fallout. But tonight, I had reclaimed not just my legal rights to my home, but my fundamental right to be seen and respected rather than managed and marginalized. And that, perhaps, was the most important deed transfer of all. The morning after the dinner, party confrontation dawned with ominous gray clouds that matched my mood. I had spent the night in Judith's guest room, surrounded by her eclectic collection of travel souvenirs and well-thumbed mystery novels. Though she had offered her home for as long as you need, we both knew I would need to return to my own house today to face the aftermath of my revelation. "Want me to come with you?" Judith asked over coffee, her expression suggesting she was fully prepared to serve as bodyguard if necessary. Diane offered her golf clubs again, but I told her that's probably not the direction we want this to go. I smiled despite my apprehension. I appreciate the offer, but Eleanor is meeting me there at 2. Better to keep this on a professional footing. I hesitated, then added, though I wouldn't mind a ride over. Of course, Judith agreed immediately. Drop-off service only, or would you like me to wait nearby in case you need a hasty retreat? Let's plan on a text check-in after an hour, I suggested. That should be enough time to assess the situation. As Judith drove me home, the word still applied, despite my complicated feelings about the space. I mentally prepared for various scenarios. Thomas and Vanessa might have consulted a lawyer overnight, armed with counter-arguments or legal challenges. They might attempt emotional manipulation, shifting from anger to wounded betrayal. They might have begun packing, accepting the inevitability of the situation with cold efficiency. What I hadn't prepared for was absence. The house stood silent when I unlocked the door, no sign of either Thomas or Vanessa. Dishes from the previous night's dinner party had been cleared, but evidence of hasty departure was everywhere. Cabinet doors left ajar, a wine glass toppled on the counter, Thomas's laptop charging cord dangling from an outlet with no computer. Attached, taped to the refrigerator, was a brief note in Thomas's handwriting. Staying at the Hamilton Hotel while consulting our attorney. We'll be in touch. The Hamilton was one of the city's most expensive hotels, an ironic choice given Thomas's supposed concerns about financial prudence when arguing against my excessive gardening expenses or book purchases. I wondered briefly if they had taken the Hendersons there to salvage their business dinner after my departure, attempting to reframe the evening's disruption as a quaint family misunderstanding. With unexpected privacy, I moved through the house, assessing what had changed in my brief absence. Nothing appeared damaged or deliberately disturbed, though several drawers in Thomas and Vanessa's bedroom stood open, suggesting they had packed essential items in a hurry. I noted with relief that my own bedroom remained untouched, my few remaining personal treasures still arranged on the bedside table. The silence felt strange after months of navigating around Thomas and Vanessa's constant presence, their voices, their music, their opinions about every aspect of the house and its contents. In their absence, I could almost feel the house itself exhaling, the rooms reopening to possibility rather than constraint. In the kitchen, my kitchen again, not Vanessa's showcase, I ran my hand along the new marble countertops. They were beautiful, objectively speaking, but cold and impersonal compared to the well-worn butcher block Herbert had crafted decades ago. So much had been changed, so many traces of our life together erased in the name of modernization. Yet underneath the superficial alterations, the bones of the house remained. The floor plan Herbert had so carefully preserved during our renovations. The solid oak beams he had refinished by hand. The built-in bookshelves, now emptied of my books, but structurally unchanged. Like me, the house had endured a period of being minimized and redesigned according to someone else's vision, but its essential character remained intact. At precisely 2 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Eleanor stood on the porch, professional in a charcoal pantsuit, but with a splash of personality in her vivid red glasses and matching scarf. "I see we're having a private conference," she observed as I welcomed her in. Thomas and Vanessa decided to make themselves scarce? Apparently they're consulting their attorney at the Hamilton, I explained, leading her to the dining room where we could spread out documents on the table. My table, I reminded myself, still covered with Vanessa's. Platinum-rimmed china from the dinner party. Eleanor raised an eyebrow. Interesting choice. The Hamilton charges upwards of $500 per night. Not exactly economical for what could be a 30-day transition. I suspect it's meant to communicate their financial resources, I replied, clearing away the china to make space for our paperwork. An implied threat that they can afford expensive legal representation. Money doesn't strengthen weak legal positions, Eleanor said calmly, arranging folders with methodical precision. And their position is extraordinarily weak. Have they communicated with you directly since last night? Just the note on the refrigerator. Though I expect they'll... The sound of a key in the front door interrupted me. Heavy footsteps in the hallway announced Thomas's arrival, followed by Vanessa's lighter tread and a third set I didn't recognize. "Completely blindsided us," Thomas was saying as they approached the dining room. after everything we've done. For her, the investments we've made in the property. He stopped abruptly at the sight of Eleanor and me seated at the dining table, documents neatly arranged before us. Vanessa nearly collided with him from behind, and a third person, a thin man in an expensive suit, peered around them both with undisguised curiosity. "Mom," Thomas acknowledged stiffly. "We didn't expect you back so soon." "It's my home," I reminded him gently. "Where else would I be on a Sunday afternoon?" The man in the suit stepped forward, extending his hand with practiced confidence. "Richard Markham, attorney at law. I'm representing Thomas and Vanessa in this family matter." He glanced at Eleanor. "And you are?" "Eleanor Blackwood, elder law specialist," she replied, shaking his hand briefly. "Representing Margaret Caldwell." Recognition flickered in Markham's eyes at Eleanor's name, followed by a careful reassessment. Whatever Thomas and Vanessa had told him he was now recalibrating his approach based on Eleanor's reputation. "I understand Mrs. Caldwell has executed a deed transfer to her daughter," he said, adopting a tone of professional neutrality. "My clients have some concerns about the circumstances surrounding that transfer." "I'm sure they do," Eleanor replied pleasantly. "However, the transfer was completed with full legal compliance and extensive documentation of Mrs. Caldwell's capacity and intent. If you're planning to challenge on grounds of coercion or diminished capacity, I should warn you that we anticipated those avenues and have thoroughly closed them." Thomas stepped forward, abandoning the pretense of legal formality. "Mom, you need to undo this. Whatever Charlotte has convinced you to do, whatever you think you're accomplishing, this isn't the way. We're family. We should be working together, not involving lawyers and property transfers." "I agree," I said quietly. "Family should work together. Family should respect each other's autonomy and dignity. Family shouldn't plan to ship their mother to a retirement home without her knowledge or consent, or make her eat in the laundry room while entertaining business associates." Vanessa made a small sound of frustration. "That was one dinner, one evening, and you've turned it into this nuclear option." "The dinner was merely the culmination," I corrected her. "The deed transfer was in response to months of systematic displacement, not one evening's arrangement. The brochures for Sunny Pines, the draft power of attorney, the transition timeline, hidden in Thomas's desk." Markham's expression shifted slightly at this new information. He turned to Thomas with a questioning look. "We were exploring options," Thomas insisted. "Responsible options for Mom's long-term care as she ages. That's what loving children do. They plan ahead." "Without consulting the parent in question?" Eleanor asked mildly. "Without respecting her clearly expressed wishes to remain in her home, while simultaneously renovating that home to erase her presence and preferences? That doesn't sound like planning for care. It sounds like planning for acquisition." Markham cleared his throat. "Perhaps we could approach this more constructively. Mrs. Caldwell clearly feels her wishes weren't being respected, and my clients feel blindsided by the property transfer. Surely there's a compromise that acknowledges both perspectives." "What compromise would you suggest?" I asked, genuinely curious what they might offer now that their original plan had collapsed. Thomas exchanged glances with Vanessa before responding. "We've invested significantly in improving the property. Thousands of dollars in renovations that have increased its value. We should be compensated for those improvements, at minimum." "Improvements I never requested," I reminded him. "Changes that actively removed features I valued, like your father's handcrafted cabinets and tile work." "Nevertheless," Markham interjected, "there has been material investment in the property. Under normal circumstances, that would create some equity interest." Eleanor smiled thinly. "Under normal circumstances, tenants would have a lease agreement, specifying their rights to make alterations to the property. Did Thomas and Vanessa have such an agreement? Or did they make these improvements unilaterally, often against Margaret's expressed preferences?" The attorney shifted uncomfortably. My understanding is that there was a family agreement about shared residence and property maintenance. Was there? Eleanor turned to me. Margaret, did you at any point agree to wholesale renovation of the home you've owned for 46 years? Did you authorize removal of original features and finishings? No, I said firmly. I agreed to let Thomas and Vanessa stay here temporarily, while they found their own place. I never agreed to redesigning my home according to their preferences. Markham's professional demeanor slipped slightly as he realized the weakness of his client's position. Regardless of formal agreements, there's a clear financial investment that should be recognized in any resolution. We're willing to be reasonable about that, Eleanor conceded. Margaret has authorized me to offer a compromise. Charlotte, as the new property owner, will not seek back rent for the months Thomas and Vanessa have occupied the home. In exchange, we won't require compensation for the personal items removed or disposed of without authorization, which Margaret estimates at several $1,000s in value. That's not a compromise, Thomas objected. That's just mutually agreeing not to sue each other. Essentially, yes, Eleanor agreed. Given the circumstances, a clean break seems the most practical solution. You have 29 days remaining, from the official notice to find new housing. Margaret is willing to be flexible about access to collect your belongings during that time, provided she receives appropriate notice of your visits. The reality of the situation finally seemed to penetrate Thomas and Vanessa's assumption that they could negotiate their way back into control. This wasn't a misunderstanding to be clarified or a family disagreement to be smoothed over. This was a legal change of ownership that had already been executed and recorded. And if we refuse to accept these terms? Vanessa asked, her voice tight, with suppressed anger. Then we proceed with formal eviction through the courts, Eleanor replied calmly, which would create a public record and potentially impact your future rental applications. I don't recommend that path, but it's certainly available if you prefer. A tense silence filled the dining room as Thomas and Vanessa absorbed the finality of their situation. I watched my son's face, the face I had loved since the moment the doctor placed him in my arms 43 years ago, and saw the kaleidoscope of emotions behind his carefully maintained expression. Anger, certainly. Calculation, looking for angles of attack. But beneath those, something that looked almost like relief. As if having lost the battle for control, he could finally stop fighting. We need time to consider our options, Markham said finally. My clients will continue their hotel stay while we review the legal documentation and formulate a response. Of course, Eleanor agreed. We'll expect your response within 3 business days. After that, we'll proceed based on the assumption that you accept the terms as outlined. As they prepared to leave, Thomas paused in the doorway, looking back at me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret. I never meant for things to get this far, he said quietly. Neither did I replied, holding his gaze. Neither did Bruce. 6 months after the confrontation in my dining room, spring had returned to Maple Avenue. The garden, neglected during Thomas and Vanessa's tenure, was showing signs of recovery under my renewed attention. Herbert's heirloom roses hadn't survived the low-maintenance landscaping overhaul, but I had planted new ones, different varieties that would establish their own legacy rather than attempting to recreate what was lost. Inside, the house was undergoing a similar transformation, not back to what it had been before Thomas and Vanessa's renovations, but forward into something that honored its history while acknowledging change. Some alterations couldn't be undone. The marble countertops and stainless appliances would remain, but I'd hired a local woodworker to create cabinet facings inspired by Herbert's original designs. The glass-enclosed shower in the upstairs bathroom stayed, but I'd found a salvaged clawfoot tub for the downstairs bathroom, similar to the one Vanessa had discarded. It's like you're having a conversation with the house, Charlotte observed during her monthly visit from Arizona. She had flown in regularly since the deed transfer, initially to support me through the transition, but continuing out of a genuine desire to reconnect with her childhood home. Acknowledging what's changed while reintroducing elements that matter to you. We were sitting on the front porch, watching neighborhood children ride bikes along the sidewalk, much as Charlotte and Thomas had done decades earlier. The porch furniture was new. The wicker set Thomas had placed in storage had suffered water damage, but the atmosphere of relaxed observation was familiar, a tradition dating back to when Herbert and I first moved in. I suppose that's true, I agreed, sipping iced tea from glasses that had survived the great kitchenware purge. No point pretending the changes didn't happen, but no reason to live with all of them either. Charlotte studied me over the rim of her glass. And how about the changes in you? Those staying too? The question deserved consideration. I had indeed changed over the past months, in ways both subtle and profound. The Margaret who had quietly accepted relegation to smaller and smaller spaces in her own home was gone, replaced by a woman who had reclaimed not just physical territory, but personal authority. I think so, I said finally. Not the hurt, that's fading, but the clarity, the boundaries, those I'm keeping. After Thomas and Vanessa moved out, ultimately accepting the terms Eleanor had outlined, though not without a final attempt to claim compensation for their property improvements, I had experienced a complex mixture of emotions. Relief at reclaiming my space, lingering anger at their betrayal of trust, sadness at the fracturing of family bonds, but beneath all of those, a growing certainty that I had done what was necessary, not just for my immediate comfort, but for my long-term dignity. Have you heard from him? Charlotte asked, the careful neutrality in her voice suggesting she'd been wanting to ask this question since her arrival 2 days ago. A birthday card last month, I replied. Very formal. Wishing you well on your special day. Signed by both of them, though only Thomas's handwriting. Charlotte nodded, unsurprised. That matches my experience. Christmas card, Easter text message, but nothing personal. Nothing real. The distance between Thomas and the rest of the family had been an unintended but perhaps inevitable consequence of the confrontation. He and Vanessa had purchased a condominium downtown, ironically similar to the ones I'd found him researching the day I discovered the retirement home brochures, and seemed to be continuing their lives with minimal acknowledgement of what had transpired. Do you regret it? Charlotte asked, watching my face closely. The deed transfer? The eviction? Any of it? No, I said without hesitation. I regret that it became necessary. I regret that Thomas and Vanessa created a situation where legal protection was my only recourse. But the actions themselves? No. The certainty in my voice seemed to reassure her. As the legal owner of the house, Charlotte had worried about the emotional burden her new role might place on me. Despite the life estate provision guaranteeing my residence, would I feel like a guest in what had been my own home for nearly 5 decades? It's still my home, I had assured her repeatedly. The legal arrangements just ensure it remains that way. And it was true. In the months since Thomas and Vanessa's departure, I had reclaimed the house room by room, not by erasing their renovations, but by recontextualizing them within my own vision. The fresh paint colors remained, but family photographs returned to the walls. The modernized kitchen kept its new appliances, but Herbert's cookbooks once again filled the shelves. It was a blend of old and new that felt right for this chapter of my life, respectful of history without being imprisoned by it. My social world had expanded as well. Without Thomas and Vanessa's subtle discouragement of visitors, I had resumed hosting weekly card games with Judith, Diane, and Frances. The book club I'd reluctantly abandoned during their residency now met monthly in my living room. The neighborhood children, initially confused by the changing dynamics at the Caldwell house, had gradually returned to stopping by for cookies after school, drawn by the relaxed welcome that had been temporarily suspended. Most significantly, I had converted the third bedroom, formerly Vanessa's extensive closet, into a proper guest room for Lily and Amelia, Charlotte's daughters. After years of limited contact with their grandmother, they were discovering the joy of extended visits in the house where their mother had grown up. Amelia, the younger at 12, had developed a particular fascination with Herbert's workshop. In the basement, spending hours examining his tools and asking questions about his craftsmanship. Mom would have loved teaching her how to use the lathe, I commented to Charlotte, as we watched Amelia carefully sanding a small piece of wood on the porch steps, her tongue caught between her teeth in concentration, exactly as Herbert's used to be. She gets that focused expression from him, Charlotte agreed. Thomas does too, though he'd hate to admit it now. The mention of Thomas brought a momentary melancholy to our peaceful afternoon. Despite the justification for our estrangement, there remained an undeniable hollowness where family connection should have been. Charlotte felt it too. I could see it in the slight downward turn of her mouth, the unconscious twisting of her wedding band. "Do you think there will ever be reconciliation?" she asked, giving voice to the question that occasionally surfaced during our conversations. Not forgetting what happened, but some kind of relationship again? I considered this, carefully, watching Amelia blow sawdust from her project with the serious concentration of a craftsperson. I don't know. It would require acknowledgement on his part. Real acknowledgement, not just polite détente. And I'm not sure Thomas is capable of that kind of self-reflection. He wasn't always like this, Charlotte said softly. I remember when we were kids, how he used to help Dad in the workshop, how proud he was of learning to use each tool. When did that boy become someone who would erase Dad's craftsmanship without a second thought? It was a question I had asked myself countless times over the past months, searching memories for warning signs I might have missed. Inflection points where Thomas's natural ambition had twisted into something colder and more calculating. Had it been his business education, where everything was reduced to assets and liabilities? His marriage to Vanessa, whose vision of success seemed narrowly defined by appearances and acquisitions? Or had the seeds always been there, a fundamental difference in values that only became apparent with time and circumstance? I think, I said slowly, that people reveal themselves gradually, and we see what we're prepared to see. For years I saw the son I remembered, the boy in the workshop, even as evidence mounted that he had become someone quite different. And now? Charlotte prompted. Now I see him clearly, I replied. Not with anger anymore, but with accuracy. I see a man who prioritizes certain definitions of success over family connection, who views relationships through the lens of utility rather than affection. That clarity doesn't prevent reconciliation, but it does establish parameters for what kind of relationship might be possible. Charlotte nodded, understanding. Boundaries, not barriers. Exactly. As the afternoon light softened toward evening, Judith's car appeared at the curb. She waved cheerfully as she approached, carrying a dish that undoubtedly contained her famous lasagna, our standing Sunday dinner arrangement since I had reclaimed my home. Hope there's room for one more, she called. Diane's bringing tiramisu, and Francis is running late but promised a spectacular salad, whatever that means. Always room, I assured her, rising to help with the heavy dish. Charlotte set the dining room table already? The dining room, Judith repeated with satisfaction. Not the laundry room. The gentle joke acknowledged how far I had come from that humiliating evening 6 months earlier. From a folding table between appliances to the head of my own dining table, surrounded by chosen family rather than grudging tolerance. The contrast wasn't lost on any of us. Later, as we gathered around that table, Charlotte, Amelia, Lily, Judith, Diane, Francis, and me, I looked at the faces illuminated by candlelight and felt a fullness that had nothing to do with legal ownership and everything to do with genuine belonging. This was what home truly meant. Not just walls and furnishings, but spaces where each person's presence was valued, where dignity and connection flourished in equal measure. We raised glasses in a toast Charlotte proposed. To homes that shelter more than bodies, that shelter spirits and dignity too. As crystal clinked and conversation flowed, I thought about the long journey from that laundry room table to this moment of shared abundance. The deed transfer papers had changed legal ownership, yes, but the more profound transfer had been internal, from accommodation to advocacy, from silence to self-expression, from diminishment to wholeness. That transformation, unlike the house itself, belonged entirely and irrevocably to me. Sometimes the most profound changes happen not in dramatic confrontations, but in quiet moments afterward. The small, daily choices that gradually reshape our understanding of ourselves and our place in the world. As spring gave way to summer, then autumn, and finally winter again, I found myself living a life both familiar and entirely new, built on the foundation of that pivotal evening when I refused to eat alone in my laundry room. Today marks exactly 1 year since the confrontation that changed everything. Outside, the first snow of the season dusts Maple Avenue with delicate white, transforming the neighborhood into a scene reminiscent of the Christmas cards Herbert and I used to send. Inside, the house hums with gentle activity as I prepare for the annual holiday gathering I've hosted since reclaiming my home. "This garland needs more cranberries," Judith declares, holding up the string we've been working on all morning. At 73, her hands show more prominent veins and occasional tremors, but her eye for detail remains impeccable. "Symmetry matters, Margaret. Your mathematician husband would agree." Herbert believed in the golden ratio. Not obsessive. Evenness, I counter, but reach for more cranberries anyway. These friendly disagreements about decorating have become part of our tradition, as much as the pine branches Francis will bring later, or the handmade ornaments Diane contributes each year. My phone chimes with a text from Charlotte. "Flight landed. Rental car acquired. ETA 2 hours with good traffic. Girls vibrating with excitement." I smile, anticipating my granddaughter's arrival. Lily, now 16, has been sending me photos of the ceramic ornaments she made in her art class specifically for my tree. Amelia, 13, has apparently prepared a surprise piano performance of Herbert's favorite carols, practiced in secret with Elena's help. What began as Charlotte's monthly support visits has evolved into regular family gatherings, each one healing a little more of the fracture left by Thomas and Vanessa's departure. The third bedroom is now permanently the girls' room, decorated with photos of their visits and small projects they've left behind. Charlotte and Elena have discussed potentially relocating closer when Elena retires from her university position. In a few years, a possibility that seemed unimaginable before the deed transfer clarified both ownership and intentions. "Any word from Thomas?" Judith asks carefully, threading another cranberry. She knows to check in private rather than bringing up the topic when others are present. "An email yesterday," I reply. "Very formal. He and Vanessa are spending the holidays at a ski resort in Vermont. He wished me well and hoped I was comfortable and well cared for in my home." Judith snorts. "Still can't bring himself to acknowledge that you're perfectly capable of caring for yourself." "Some narratives die hard," I say, finding that the observation no longer carries the sting it once did. In his version of events, I'm still the vulnerable elderly mother who needed protection from herself, not the woman who outmaneuvered his attempt to claim my home. The relationship with Thomas remains complex, more diplomatic communication than family connection. After several months of formal birthday and holiday greetings, he had finally requested a meeting to clear the air. We'd met at a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown, where he'd offered what he clearly considered an olive branch. "I still believe we were trying to do what was best for you," he'd said, stirring his coffee with methodical precision. "But I recognize we should have been more transparent about our concerns and plans." Not an apology, I'd noted, but an acknowledgement of tactical error. He regretted not the intention, but the execution, not the planned displacement, but the failure to manage it more effectively. And I believe you've convinced yourself of that, I'd replied. But we both know there's a difference between concern for my welfare and interest in my property. He'd flinched slightly at the directness, his expression suggesting he wasn't accustomed to such clarity from me. The mother he remembered, or perhaps had constructed in his mind, was someone who softened edges, who accommodated others' narratives rather than asserting her own. "Can we move forward somehow?" he'd asked after a moment. "Find some way to be family again, even if it looks different than before?" I'd considered his question carefully, recognizing both the limitation and possibility within it. "I think we can establish a relationship based on mutual respect rather than assumptions. That would be a beginning. Since that conversation, we have maintained what might be called cordial distance. Occasional emails, brief phone calls on significant dates, but no pretense of the closeness that would require deeper reconciliation. Vanessa remains largely absent from these exchanges, presumably still resentful of the outcome, but unwilling to directly oppose the détente Thomas has established. "It's more than I expected," I tell Judith honestly, "and less than I might have hoped once upon a time. But it's real at least, based on who we actually are, rather than who we wish the other would be." Judith nods, understanding the bittersweet quality of this evolution. And that's no small thing. A knock at the door interrupts our cranberry stringing. Frances enters in a flurry of scarves and shopping bags, snow-dusting her sensible boots. "The roads are getting slippery," she announces, unwinding a colorful scarf knitted by her granddaughter. "But I've brought reinforcements to fortify us against the elements." The reinforcements proved to be homemade gingerbread cookies and a thermos of hot chocolate, enhanced with a generous splash of amaretto. "For medicinal purposes only," she insists with a wink as she pours mugs for each of us as we settle in. The living room with our treats, I glance around at the space that has truly become mine again over the past year. The walls, still painted in the cool gray Vanessa selected, now display a gallery of photographs, Herbert and me on our wedding day, the children at various ages, newer images of Charlotte's family, and several of the iconic black and white photographs Herbert had given me for our anniversaries. The furniture represents a similar blend of old and new. The uncomfortable modernist sofa Thomas and Vanessa had purchased has been replaced by a more traditional sectional, its comfort prioritized over cutting-edge design. Herbert's reading chair, rescued from storage, occupies its original position, by the window, while a contemporary coffee table selected with my own taste in mind anchors the seating arrangement. "I always feel like I can breathe in here," Frances comments, noticing my survey of the room. "It feels like you, Margaret." The observation touches me deeply, capturing exactly what I've strived to create since reclaiming my home. Not a museum to the past, nor a surrender to imposed modernization, but a genuine reflection of who I am now, shaped by history, but not confined by it. That's the highest compliment, I tell her, to have a home that feels like oneself. As afternoon edges toward evening, the house gradually fills with friends and chosen family. Diane arrives with her famous tiramisu and a new gentleman friend, Gerald, a fellow widower from her building with kind eyes and an impressive repertoire of terrible jokes. Charlotte, Elena, and the girls appear just as the streetlights come on, bringing suitcases, beautifully wrapped gifts, and the particular energy of people who have traveled far to be exactly where they want to be. The dining room table, my table, where I once wasn't permitted to sit during a business dinner, extends to accommodate everyone comfortably. The china is neither Vanessa's sleek platinum-rimmed set nor my grandmother's floral pattern, but a new service I selected myself, simple white with a delicate blue border that complements both traditional and contemporary settings. "Grandma, can we use the crystal glasses?" Amelia asks, already heading toward the cabinet where Herbert's mother's stemware is displayed. "The ones that make that pretty sound when you tap them?" "Of course," I agree, watching as she carefully removes each piece with the reverence of someone who understands their significance beyond their function. Your great-grandfather gave those to your great-grandmother on their 25th anniversary. Your grandfather and I used them for every special occasion. I remember Dad telling me that, she says thoughtfully. Before, before everything changed. The observation hangs in the air for a moment, a reminder that the family fracture affects not just my relationship with Thomas but connections across generations. Amelia and Lily see their uncle rarely now, their understanding of family history potentially fragmented by adult conflicts they had no part in creating. The glasses remain, I tell her gently, and the memories, and you're here to create new ones. That's what matters most. As everyone gathers around the table, the conversation flows easily, punctuated by laughter and the occasional gentle disagreement that characterizes genuine family interaction. We toast with Herbert's crystal, the delicate ping when glasses touch feeling like a connection across time, to all the holiday gatherings that have taken place in this room, to all the people who have shared meals at this table. I find myself watching Charlotte as she serves the holiday roast, noting how she has her father's way of ensuring everyone's plate is perfect before attending to her own. I see Herbert in Lily's meticulous arrangement of dinner rolls in the breadbasket, in Amelia's focused concentration as she pours water without spilling a drop. These inheritances of gesture and care transcend legal documents and property transfers, connecting us through shared history that cannot be renovated away or redesigned according to current trends. Later, as we linger over dessert and coffee, the doorbell rings unexpectedly. Charlotte rises to answer it, returning with an expression of careful neutrality and a small package in her hands. "It's from Thomas," she says quietly, placing it beside my plate. "The delivery person said he was instructed to bring it this evening specifically." The table falls momentarily silent, everyone aware of the significance of this gesture. Thomas knows about our holiday gathering. I had mentioned it in my last email, not as an invitation but as general family news. The timing of his gift suggests deliberate acknowledgement of our tradition rather than merely fulfilling a seasonal obligation. The package is simply wrapped in silver paper, no bow or card attached. I open it carefully, conscious of the attentive gazes around the table. Inside is a small wooden box, its lid inlaid with a pattern I recognize immediately, the same design Herbert had created for the jewelry box he made me for our 5th anniversary, the one that had disappeared during Thomas and Vanessa's decluttering. "He found it," I whisper, running my fingers over the familiar inlay. Or had it recreated. Inside the box rests a single item, the compass pendant Thomas had given me years ago, the one I had removed and tucked away the night I discovered his plans in the hospital. With it is a small card bearing a single line in Thomas's neat handwriting. "Some directions are worth finding again." Not an explicit apology, but perhaps something more meaningful, an acknowledgement of lost paths and the possibility of new ones, even if they don't lead exactly where we once expected. A recognition that family connection, like true north, can remain a reference point even when the terrain between points has altered beyond recognition. I close the box carefully and place it beside my plate, neither rejecting the gesture nor responding to it immediately. There will be time later to consider what it means, what possibilities it might open. For now, it is enough that it exists. Tangible evidence that the events of the past year have prompted reflection not just for me, but perhaps for Thomas as well. "To finding our way," Charlotte proposes, raising her glass in a toast that acknowledges the complexity of the moment without demanding immediate resolution. "To finding our way," the table echoes, crystal ringing clear in the warm light of the Youre dining room. As I look around at these beloved faces, friends who stood by me through crisis, family who honored my autonomy when it was threatened, even the memory of Thomas represented by his unexpected gift, I realize that the true meaning of home has little to do with deed transfers or property rights. Home exists in the spaces where we are valued for who we are, rather than what we own. where our dignity remains intact even when our circumstances change, where we can tell our own stories rather than having them written for us. 1 year ago, I refused to eat alone in my laundry room. Today, I sit at the head of my table, surrounded by love and respect, my place in my own life unquestioned and secure. The legal documents protected my house, yes, but this gathering, this moment of authentic connection and belonging, that is what truly saved my home. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.